The billionaire caught the maid's toddler dancing with his daughter. What happened next? The Harrington estate sat like a crown jewel on the eastern ridge of Greenwich, Connecticut. 42 acres of manicured lawns, marble fountains, and century-old oak trees that whispered secrets to the wind. Behind its iron gates, the world operated differently. Time moved slower. Silence was purchased. And everything, from the Egyptian cotton sheets to the hand-curated art on the walls, was selected to reflect the life of a man who had earned every inch of his empire through relentless, often ruthless, precision. Ethan Harrington was 34 years old, and by every measurable standard the world used to define success, he had surpassed them all. Forbes had featured him 3 times. His technology company, Harrington Dynamics, had revolutionized artificial intelligence infrastructure across 6 continents. He had shaken hands with presidents, dined with royalty, and negotiated deals that shifted global markets with a single signature. People wrote books about him. Business schools studied his decisions. Young entrepreneurs pinned his quotes on their walls like scripture. But the person who needed him most was only 3 years old, and she barely knew his face. Lily Harrington had her mother's eyes. That was the first thing Ethan noticed when the nurses placed her in his arms in the hospital 3 years ago, and it was the thought that visited him most painfully each morning when he passed her bedroom door without opening it. Soft brown eyes, wide and luminous, always searching for something she couldn't quite name. Her mother, Camille, had died 18 months ago, a sudden cardiac event that no doctor had predicted, no amount of money had prevented, and no amount of grief counseling had helped Ethan process. She was gone in a Tuesday afternoon, between a board meeting and a dinner reservation, and the world had simply continued rotating without her. Since then, Ethan had done what he did best. He worked. He structured. He delegated. He hired Mrs. Patricia Donnelly, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and firm opinions, to manage the household. He hired a pediatric nutritionist to oversee Lily's meals, a child development specialist to monitor her milestones, and 3 rotating nannies to ensure 24-hour supervision. He hired, in short, everyone except himself. He told himself that providing the best of everything was the same as being present. He told himself that building a greater empire was the same as building a future for his daughter. He told himself many things, standing in his home office at 11 o'clock at night, staring at financial projections instead of the stars. What he didn't tell himself, what he refused to examine, was that Lily had stopped running to the door when she heard his footsteps in the hallway. That she had stopped calling for him in the night, learning somehow, in the devastating intuition of small children, that calling wouldn't bring him. That she had found her joy elsewhere, in the garden, in her picture books, in the songs she hummed to her stuffed animals, and most recently, in a friendship that had blossomed as quietly and naturally as the roses along the east garden wall. Sophia Reyes was also 3 years old. She had her mother's smile, wide, unguarded, and freely given to anyone who needed it. Her mother, Maria Reyes, had been hired 4 months ago as a part-time housekeeper, 3 mornings a week. Maria was 28, a Mexican-American woman from Bridgeport who took the bus to Greenwich at 6 in the morning and returned home in the afternoon to make dinner for Sophia and help her older brother with his homework. She was efficient, quiet, and careful, the kind of employee who learned quickly which doors to avoid and which topics to never raise in front of the permanent staff. Sophia, however, had not received that particular briefing. On Maria's 3rd day of work, she had brought Sophia along because her babysitter had canceled and she had no other option. She had dressed her daughter in a yellow sundress, braided her dark hair with a ribbon, and held her hand tightly as they entered through the service entrance. She had quietly set Sophia up in the corner of the kitchen with a juice box, a coloring book, and a firm whispered instruction. "Stay here, Mija. Don't wander. Don't touch anything." Sophia had nodded earnestly, and then, approximately 4 minutes later, wandered. She had followed the sound of music. One of the nannies had put on a children's playlist in the east sitting room where Lily was playing, and the notes drifted through the long corridor like breadcrumbs. Sophia followed them with the fearless curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of beautiful things, pushed open a door that was slightly ajar, and found herself in a room larger than her entire apartment, filled with soft afternoon light. And there was Lily, standing in the middle of a Persian rug in her socks, spinning slowly in circles with her arms out, eyes closed, completely lost in the music. Sophia watched for approximately 3 seconds. Then she walked to the center of the rug, spread her own arms wide, and began spinning too. The nanny, absorbed in her phone in the corner, didn't notice immediately. And in that small window of unobserved time, something extraordinary began. Lily opened her eyes, found a spinning stranger in front of her, and instead of crying or calling for help, did the most natural thing in the world. She laughed. A real laugh, surprised and delighted, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than manners or propriety. And Sophia laughed back. And then, as if choreographed by something ancient and invisible, they reached for each other's hands. They spun together. 2 little girls in yellow dresses, because Lily had chosen yellow that morning too, for reasons only the universe might explain, spinning on a Persian rug in a billionaire's mansion, completely equal in their joy, completely oblivious to every wall that the adult world had constructed between them. The music swelled. Their laughter rose. Their socks slid against the polished hardwood at the rug's edge, and neither of them cared. Maria Reyes found them 11 minutes later when she came looking for her daughter with terror in her chest and an apology already forming on her lips. She stood in the doorway, her heart hammering, prepared for the worst, prepared to be told to gather her things, to never return, to remember her place. Instead, she found her daughter and the billionaire's daughter sitting cross-legged on the rug, facing each other, playing a clapping game that Sophia was apparently teaching Lily with patient, 3-year-old authority. "No, like this," Sophia was saying, demonstrating the pattern with great seriousness. "You have to be faster, okay?" Maria pressed her hand over her mouth. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did both, standing silently in the doorway, tears sliding down her face, a smile she couldn't control spreading beneath her palm. She didn't notice the figure standing behind her in the corridor. She didn't know that Ethan Harrington had come home early for the first time in 11 months, that he had heard laughter he didn't recognize from the staircase, that he had followed it with the same instinct his daughter had inherited from her mother, and that he was now standing 3 feet behind Maria Reyes, looking over her shoulder at a sight that cracked something open in his chest that no amount of money had touched in 18 months. His daughter. Laughing. Reaching for someone's hand. He stood there until his vision blurred. And he didn't bother wiping his eyes. Ethan Harrington had not cried since the funeral. He had stood at Camille's graveside on a gray October morning with his jaw set and his hands clasped in front of him, accepting condolences with the controlled composure of a man who had learned from childhood that emotions were inefficiencies, that grief was a process best managed privately, and concluded promptly. His own father, a cold architected industrialist from Boston, had taught him that much. Men like them didn't fall apart in public. Men like them restructured, redirected, and continued forward. He had honored that unspoken inheritance with painful precision. He hadn't cried at the funeral. He hadn't cried in the weeks that followed, when the house filled with flowers he couldn't look at and casseroles he couldn't eat. He hadn't cried on Lily's 2nd birthday, celebrated without her mother, when his daughter had looked at the door all evening with the patience of someone who didn't yet understand permanence. He had held himself together with the same discipline he applied to quarterly earnings, compartmentalizing his devastation into something functional, productive, sealed. Standing in that corridor last evening, watching Lily's face lit with pure joy while a stranger's daughter taught her a clapping game on a Persian rug, something in that sealed compartment simply gave way. Not noisily, not dramatically, just quietly, like a dam developing a crack too fine to see, releasing something that had been building so long the pressure had become its own kind of normal. He had excused himself before Maria Reyes turned around. He had walked to his study, closed the door, sat at his desk, and pressed both hands flat against the surface like a man trying to keep himself from floating away.
He stayed that way for a long time.
Outside his window, the last light was leaving the sky, and the oak trees along the garden wall were becoming shadows, and somewhere on the other side of the house his daughter was being given her bath and her story and her good night, the same as every other evening, by someone who was paid to be there. He had hired the world's most qualified people to love his daughter in his absence. And sitting at that desk in the dark, he finally allowed himself to understand what that meant. He barely slept. At 5:30 in the morning, he was already dressed, which itself was not unusual, but he was dressed without the intention of opening his laptop, which was. He stood in his kitchen, a room he had not personally occupied before 8 a.m. in recent memory, and made coffee badly, using the wrong ratio, staring at the machine as if it were a puzzle he was approaching for the first time. At 6:45, Maria Reyes arrived. She came through the service entrance, as always, moving with the particular quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible in spaces that were not designed for her. She was removing her coat in the service hallway when she found Ethan Harrington standing at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and the look of a man who had made a decision overnight that he wasn't sure how to begin executing. Maria went still. In 4 months, she had exchanged perhaps 40 words with him total, brief professional acknowledgments in passing, the occasional good morning. She had understood, with the wordless clarity of someone who had navigated many such environments, that her role was invisible excellence. She performed it well. She kept her head down, her work impeccable, and her daughter at home. After yesterday, she had spent the bus ride home preparing her apology, then preparing to be dismissed anyway, because she understood that intention counted for very little in a space like this, and that Sophia's presence had violated a boundary she had never been told about because she had been expected to understand it without being told. That was the nature of this world. The rules were embedded in the architecture, and you either read them correctly or you suffered the consequences. She opened her mouth to begin the apology she had rehearsed. Ethan held up one hand, gently. "Please don't," he said. His voice was quieter than she expected, not commanding, almost careful. "I didn't come down here for an apology, Maria." She closed her mouth. Waited. He looked at his coffee cup. Then at the window, where the early morning light was just beginning to touch the garden. Then, with the expression of a man who has practiced a thing so many times in the mirror that the rehearsal has worn grooves into the words, he looked at her. "I've been trying to work out how to say this since last night," he admitted. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever your answer is, your position here is completely secure. I'm not using this as leverage. He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. "I saw them. Last night in the sitting room. I saw my daughter and your daughter." Maria's hands tightened around her coat. "I don't remember," Ethan said quietly, "the last time I heard Lily laugh like that. I've been trying to remember, and his jaw worked. I can't." He set the coffee cup down. "She doesn't laugh like that for me. She doesn't reach for me the way she reached for Sophia. And I know that's on me. That's something I need to fix with my daughter, and I intend to. But last night I watched a 3-year-old teach my daughter a clapping game with the patience of a saint, and my daughter was more present in that room than I have seen her in 18 months, and I—" He stopped, looked at the window again, steadied himself. "I would like to ask," he said, "if Sophia might come more often. Not to sit in a corner. Not to stay out of the way.
To play.
To be the thing she already clearly is for my daughter. A friend." He paused. "I know that's an unusual request. I know it doesn't fit neatly into any professional category. I'm not sure what it looks like in practice. But yes, that's what I'm asking." Maria Reyes had lived 38 years with tremendous grace through considerable difficulty. She did not cry easily or without reason. But standing in the service hallway of the Harrington estate at 6:45 in the morning, holding her coat against her chest while a billionaire stumbled through the most human sentence he'd probably spoken in a year, she felt the heat rise rapidly behind her eyes. "Mr. Harrington," she said carefully. "Sophia already considers this her friend's house." She paused. "I just didn't know if that was okay." Something moved across his face, quick and unguarded, there and gone. "It's okay," he said. "It's more than okay." He picked up his coffee cup, set it down again, looked briefly as though he wanted to say something else, then seemed to decide he'd used his entire reserve of vulnerability for the morning and nodded once, professionally, and left the kitchen. Maria stood in the hallway for a long moment after he was gone. Then she took out her phone and sent a text to her sister in Bridgeport. "Something happened. Something good. I'll explain later." She tucked the phone away, tied her hair back, and went to begin her work, but she was smiling, and she kept smiling for the entire rest of the morning, all the way through dusting a house that suddenly felt a few degrees warmer than it had the day before. The arrangement began informally, as the best things often do. Sophia started arriving with her mother on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, the days Maria worked. There was no contract for it, no policy document, no professional framework constructed around it. It was simply understood. Sophia would play with Lily. Lily would play with Sophia. The universe had already decided this. The adults were merely acknowledging the decision. Within a single week, the East sitting room was transformed. It became, with the totalitarian certainty of toddler authority, their room. Sophia arrived on the first Monday with a small backpack containing 3 items considered non-negotiable: her favorite storybook about a girl who could talk to the moon, a set of plastic animal figures, and a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers, which she immediately offered to share with Lily as though establishing the foundational terms of an alliance. Lily had accepted 2 crackers with great ceremony and offered Sophia the pick of her stuffed animals in return. Sophia chose a small elephant with a velvet trunk and named it Mambo on the spot. Lily had approved the name gravely. The terms were set. The partnership was sealed. They had, between them, the extraordinary creative capacity of children who had not yet been taught the limitations of imagination. Their play was elaborate and unpredictable. One morning they were veterinarians operating on Mambo and a stuffed rabbit named Sir Biscuit. The next they were explorers mapping the known universe with a roll of leftover craft tape on the sitting room floor. They built cities out of couch cushions that followed architectural principles no engineering school had yet discovered. They narrated elaborate stories about the animals in the garden. The fat robin on the east wall was named Gerald, and he was apparently a retired detective. The nannies watched with a kind of delighted bewilderment. Mrs. Donnelly, who had initially pursed her lips at the arrangement, found herself smiling at the sitting room door more often than she would admit. Even the kitchen staff, who had a tendency toward professional detachment, started leaving small extra snacks on the tray sent up with the girls' afternoon juice, because there was something about those 2 small voices tumbling down the hallway that made people instinctively want to contribute to its continuation. Ethan heard all of it from his study. He had begun, without consciously deciding to do so, leaving his study door open on the days Sophia was there. The sounds reached him the way sunlight reaches a room that has been shuttered for a long time, gradually, warmly, rearranging things. He would be on a call with a Singapore office and hear Lily's shriek of laughter from 3 rooms away, and something in his chest would release, slightly, like a breath he'd been holding. He would be reviewing documents and hear the escalating dramatic narration of whatever adventure the girls were currently conducting. Sophia was always the primary narrator, her voice carrying the natural authority of a born storyteller, and he would find himself listening instead of reading, and not minding. He started leaving his office at lunch. Just for 20 minutes, initially, a perfectly schedulable increment, easily justified. He would sit at the kitchen island with a sandwich and a report, and sometimes hear the girls pass through the corridor, and sometimes not. But the leaving itself was a change. The intentional placement of himself somewhere other than his desk during waking hours was a change. His assistant, who managed his calendar with the devotion of a high priest, noticed immediately and said nothing, which was how he knew it was significant. On the 11th day, something happened that Ethan hadn't planned for. He was crossing the main hallway toward the kitchen when the sitting room door burst open and Lily emerged at full toddler velocity, ran directly into his legs, grabbed 2 fistfuls of his dress trousers, and looked up at him with those eyes, Camille's eyes, wide with excitement, rather than the careful, assessing look she had been giving him for months.
"Daddy, come," she said.
It wasn't a question. It was an instruction, delivered with the complete confidence of someone who has recently reevaluated a situation and arrived at a clear conclusion. Sophia's doing the frog dance. You have to see. Ethan looked down at his daughter's small hands gripping his trousers. His throat tightened immediately and without warning, the way things do when they matter beyond your ability to prepare for them. He hadn't been summoned by Lillian, he couldn't count it. He couldn't count it because counting it would require acknowledging it, and he had been specifically not acknowledging it. The frog dance, he repeated. It's very funny, Lily said, already pulling. Sophia invented it. Come on. He let himself be pulled. The fabric of his $3,000 trousers gathered in 2 small fists, and he followed his daughter into the sitting room with the perfectly willing helplessness of a man who has just remembered that there are forces in the world that outrank quarterly earnings. Sophia was in the center of the rug. She had apparently decided that frogs moved in a series of enthusiastic crouching leaps accompanied by specific sound effects, and she was demonstrating this theory with total physical commitment, croaking impressively between jumps. When Lily burst in pulling her father, Sophia stopped mid-leap, landed, and looked at Ethan with the direct, unfiltered assessment that 3-year-olds are famous for.
"Hi," she said.
Do you know how frogs jump? I thought I did, Ethan said. But I suspect I've been doing it wrong. Sophia nodded, unsurprised by this admission. Most grown-ups do, she said generously. It's okay. I can show you. What followed was 6 minutes that Ethan Harrington would carry with him for the rest of his life. He did the frog dance. He did it badly and then better, coached with patient toddler precision by Sophia and gleeful encouragement from Lily, who at one point climbed onto the couch to get a better view and narrate her father's performance like a sportscaster. He croaked.
He jumped.
He knocked over a decorative pillow, and Sophia picked it up and placed it aside very responsibly and continued the lesson without missing a beat. At some point, he ended up sitting cross-legged on the rug, the same rug where it had all begun, and Lily climbed directly into his lap and leaned against his chest with the absolute unself-consciousness of a child who has decided, on her own internal timeline, that she is ready to come home. He wrapped his arms around her and stared at the top of her head and felt the warmth of her small weight against him and thought, I have been so far away. I have been so far away, and she waited for me to find her. Across the rug, Sophia was resuming a conversation with Mambo the elephant about the logistics of underwater exploration. Ethan pressed his face into Lily's hair and breathed her in and said nothing, because there was nothing large enough in language for the moment. April arrived with its particular softness, and the garden behind the Harrington estate came alive with the slow, certain confidence of things that have been waiting patiently through cold. The roses along the east wall opened. The fountain, shut off through winter, was turned back on, its sound filling the garden with something that felt like exhaling. Maria Reyes noticed the garden because she had always noticed beautiful things, even when she had no time to stand still with them. She noticed them on the move, a glance through a window while she worked, a pause of 3 seconds at a doorway, a breath of fragrant air taken deliberately because she had learned to find nourishment in small things when large things were limited. She had grown up with limitations that had never asked her permission. She was the daughter of a woman who had cleaned other people's houses her entire life, and the granddaughter of a woman who had done the same before her, and she had grown up inside that particular inheritance with a very clear understanding of which room she belonged in and which she merely passed through. She had worked since she was 15. She had put herself through 2 years of community college on alternating semesters around work schedules. She had married at 24 to a man who meant well but ultimately meant well from a very long distance, and she had been raising Sophia mostly alone for the past 2 years with the exhausted, determined, deeply loving confidence of someone who has decided that love is a verb and she intends to conjugate it in every tense. Sophia was her masterpiece and her greatest joy, the thing she made right every day even when everything else went sideways. She saw in Sophia the wide-open future she had wanted for herself, the fearlessness, the vocabulary, the absolute refusal to be diminished by rooms or circumstances. She read to Sophia every night, even when she was tired to her bones. She answered every question, even the relentless, impossible ones about why the sky was blue, and why worms came out in the rain, and why some people had more than others. That last question Sophia had asked on the bus ride home one Wednesday evening, looking out the window as Greenwich became Bridgeport and the landscaping became concrete and the big quiet houses became apartment buildings stacked against each other like books on a crowded shelf. Mama, why does Lily have such a big house? Maria had prepared for this question in theory. She gave the answer she had practiced, something about different jobs, different circumstances, how all homes were full of love, and that was what mattered. And Sophia had nodded and accepted it with the pragmatic grace she applied to most information and turned back to the window. But the question had stayed with Maria. Not the economics of it. She understood those with the crystal clarity of someone who lived inside them daily. It was something else. Something about watching her daughter in that sitting room. Something about the absolute ease with which Sophia inhabited that space. The Persian rug, the soft furnishings, the room larger than their apartment. Not because she didn't notice the difference, but because she had the 3-year-old's profound gift of knowing that none of it actually mattered. Sophia didn't carry the weight of the distance between the two worlds because she hadn't learned yet that it was weight. She just knew. There was Lily. There was friendship. There was the frog dance and Mambo the elephant and Gerald the retired Detective Robin on the garden wall. Everything else was furniture. Maria wanted to preserve that in her daughter the way you'd press a flower between the pages of a book, carefully, with the awareness that it is already perfect and your only job is not to crush it. She was thinking about this on a Wednesday morning in mid-April when Ethan Harrington came and found her in the library, where she was dusting the shelves with the practiced invisibility she had perfected over years. He knocked on the open door, actually knocked, which struck her as telling, and she turned. He looked different than he had in January. She had noticed this accumulating over weeks. His shoulders carried less of that particular tension that had defined him when she first arrived, the coiled, braced quality of someone perpetually absorbing impact. He looked, occasionally, like he might be sleeping. He had been eating breakfast in the kitchen when she arrived on 2 recent Mondays, sitting with Lily over cereal, talking to her about absolutely nothing in particular with the careful attention of someone learning a language he had let lapse. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, coming in and sitting, surprising her, in one of the reading chairs, as if this were a conversation between two people rather than an employer issuing a directive. "Sophia's birthday is in 3 weeks. Lily told me." Sophia apparently mentions it frequently. Maria smiled despite herself. "She does. She's been planning it since February." "I want to do something for her birthday," Ethan said. He had clearly also planned what he intended to say, and equally clearly it was not quite coming out the way he'd arranged it. Not in an overstepping way. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable. The girls have become something important to each other. Sophia has become something important to Lily, which means she is something important to me, and what does Sophia love? What would make her feel celebrated?" Maria was quiet for a moment, moved in a way she didn't entirely want to display. "She loves animals," she said finally. "Real ones. We go to the Bridgeport Zoo when I can manage the bus fare, and she talks about it for weeks. She loves music, anything she can dance to. And she loves being taken seriously."
She paused.
"That's the big one. Sophia wants people to listen to her ideas. She doesn't want to be patted on the head. She wants to be heard." Ethan absorbed this, nodded slowly. "She's 3 years old, and she wants to be taken seriously." "She's been that way since she could talk," Maria said. Maybe before. Something shifted in his face, a recognition, deep and slightly painful, like a man seeing himself in a story that wasn't told about him. Yeah, he said quietly. I understand that, actually. He stood, looked at the bookshelves for a moment, as if they contained something he was looking for. Then, could I ask you something personal? You can absolutely decline. She waited. Are you? He stopped. Reconsidered. Is there anything I can do, not as your employer, but is there anything that would make things easier? For you? I know what I pay you. I know what bus you take. I know what time you leave and what time you get back, and I know there's a gap, Maria, between your life and this house, and I was very comfortable not looking at it directly for a long time, and I don't want to be that person anymore. He looked at her steadily. I don't want to be someone who benefits from your family without seeing your family. What do you need? The library was very quiet. Outside the window, the fountain was running. Maria thought, briefly, of her daughter spinning on a Persian rug with her arms out, being seen. A living wage, she said simply, would change our lives. He nodded. Not defensively. Not with the performance of generosity. Just nodded. I'll have it adjusted by end of week. Retroactive to January. He moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you for trusting me with Sophia. I know you didn't have to. Maria turned back to the shelves. Her hands were completely steady. Her eyes were not. Sophia Reyes turned 3 on the 1st of May, and the day arrived dressed in its finest. A morning so blue and warm and perfectly calibrated that it seemed less like weather and more like intention. Maria had not known what to expect. Ethan had asked, in his careful way, whether he might plan something for Sophia's birthday at the estate, and she had said yes with more trust than the years had trained her to offer, because something had shifted between them over these months that was difficult to categorize but impossible to dismiss. He was trying, genuinely, imperfectly, belatedly trying, to see his daughter, to see the people around him, to be in the rooms he occupied rather than merely standing in them. It was not a transformation. It was something quieter and more credible, a man in the slow, earnest work of becoming someone better. She brought Sophia in through the front gate, not the service entrance. He had sent a specific message about that the night before. Please come to the front. You are not working today. You are guests. Maria had read it twice, then a third time, then set her phone down and had a private moment with herself in the kitchen of her apartment. The front gate opened onto the main drive, lined on both sides with white tulips that the groundskeeper had planted in 2 straight runs, and at the end of the drive stood Lily in a pink dress and her best shoes, vibrating with the barely contained energy of someone who has been awake since 5 a.m. with important news. Behind her, 1 step back, stood Ethan, in a shirt with the collar open. No jacket, no tie, holding a small bouquet of yellow flowers. When Sophia saw Lily, she screamed with joy and broke from Maria's hand and ran with the full abandonment of someone who has seen the most important thing and must reach it immediately. Lily ran toward her with equal velocity, and they met in the middle of the tulip-lined drive and collided and grabbed each other and jumped up and down in a circle, and the sound they made was one of the purest sounds available on earth. Ethan walked to Maria, extended the yellow flowers. Good morning, he said. Maria took the flowers. Good morning. She looked at their daughters, still spinning, still laughing. You didn't have to do all this. I know, he said. And then, simply, I wanted to. What he had arranged, with the consultation of his entire household staff and 2 specialists and the very clear guidance of Sophia's expressed wishes, which Lily had evidently been collecting and reporting back with the dedication of a field researcher, was not a grand, overwhelming affair. It was calibrated to a 3-year-old's specific joy. There was a petting zoo in the East Garden, small, personal, with a patient handler, featuring a miniature donkey named Clover, 2 baby goats, and a rabbit who sat in your lap like he'd always planned to be there. There was a musician in the garden, a young woman with a guitar, who played children's songs and also, upon request, invented new songs on the spot, which Sophia immediately requested and then co-wrote with detailed creative input. There was a cake that Sophia had been consulted about remotely, chocolate with yellow frosting and a fondant elephant on top. Lily had insisted on the elephant. Maria suspected the elephant was named Mambo in her heart even if it wasn't written on the cake. And there was, arranged in the shade of the oldest oak tree, a picnic, not catered, not formal, but built deliberately from things Maria had mentioned Sophia loved. The mango popsicles she got as a treat on Saturdays, the little sandwiches with the crusts cut off, the fruit arranged not decoratively but exuberantly, in big bowls you could reach into freely. Maria sat on a blanket under the oak tree and watched her daughter conduct the birthday party, like a small CEO. Sophia had definite opinions about which goat to hold first, the spotted one. Definite opinions about what song the guitarist should attempt next, something about a cat who went to the moon. She provided the outline. The musician heroically improvised the melody. And definite, patient opinions about how the cake should be cut and distributed, ensuring that every person present, the gardener, the housekeeper, the guitarist, the petting zoo handler, received a piece because it was her party. And she had decided that everyone being fed was the primary objective. Ethan sat on the blanket beside Maria. He had been orbiting the party for the first hour, present, visible, engaged, but with a slight held-back quality of someone who wasn't entirely sure where he fit. She had watched him help Lily with a rabbit, watched him nod seriously while Sophia explained the correct technique for approaching goats, slowly, with open hands, introducing herself calmly. Watched him laugh, a real laugh, surprised out of him, when the baby goat ate the corner of his sleeve. When he finally sat on the blanket, it was with the careful exhale of someone setting something down. "This is a good day," he said. Not performatively. Quietly. To the tree, or the sky, or no one specific. "It is," Maria agreed. Across the garden, Sophia had organized Lily into a dancing session, demonstrating to the guitarist the specific requirements of the frog dance with technical precision. The guitarist, admirably, was attempting to score it in real time. Ethan watched his daughter leap and croak with her whole small body, and he was smiling, unguarded, unmanaged, the smile of someone who has stopped calculating the appropriate measure of things and is simply present inside a moment. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "about what I want her to know. What I want Lily to understand about the world." He paused. "I spent a long time thinking that what I was building, the company, the security, all of it was what I was giving her. The best possible platform." He looked at the grass. "I still think stability matters. I'm not going to pretend I've become a different person. But I've been thinking that what she's actually learned this year, what changed her, wasn't anything I engineered. It was Sophia.
It was your daughter, Maria.
This little girl who walked into a room without an invitation and started spinning, and my daughter just reached for her hand." Maria was quiet. "I want Lily to be someone who reaches for hands," Ethan said. "Regardless of whose hand it is. Regardless of what room they came from or how they got there." He looked at her. "Sophia already knows how to do that. She came that way." He paused. "You made her that way." Maria looked at Sophia, curtly explaining to the guitarist that the second verse of the Cat Moon song needed more urgency. "She was born reaching," she said softly. "I just tried not to teach her to stop." They sat in silence that was not uncomfortable. The guitarist found the urgency Sophia required. The girls resumed their dance. Clover the miniature donkey ambled peacefully near the garden wall, and Gerald the fat robin, apparently retired from detective work for the afternoon, sat on the wall above him, watching everything with the satisfied expression of someone who has seen this story before and knows how it ends. "I'd like Sophia to keep coming," Ethan said. "After, not just on your working days. I mean, if you're amenable, the girls as friends. For as long as they want to be." He looked at the garden. "And you if you'd like to. You don't have to work when you're here. You can just be here." Maria turned this over. Felt its weight, which was neither small nor simple, because she understood the gap between these two worlds better than he did, had lived inside it every day of her life, and she knew that closing it was not a single decision or a single generous gesture, but 1,000 small choices made consecutively, imperfectly, over time. But she also knew what she had seen. She had seen a closed man open a door. She had seen her daughter taken seriously. She had seen yellow flowers at the front gate.
"We'd like that," she said.
Across the garden, Sophia had just successfully taught the frog dance to the petting zoo handler, the guitarist, and Lily simultaneously, and was now directing the ensemble with her arms like a tiny conductor, her dark braid flying, her whole face luminous with the satisfaction of someone whose idea is working exactly as intended. Ethan Harrington watched 3-year-old Sophia Reyes conduct her own birthday party under the oak tree in his garden, surrounded by people who were laughing because she had decided they would, in a space she had made her own without being told she could, and he thought about the particular kind of wealth that cannot be listed on a balance sheet. The kind that walks in through an unlatched door and reaches for your daughter's hand and teaches her to laugh like she used to, freely, without consulting whether it was appropriate. He thought about what it had cost him nothing to offer, the front gate, the yellow flowers, the place on the blanket, and what it had returned, and how the math of that made everything he had previously considered valuable look briefly, strangely very small. And then Lily looked up from the ensemble frog dance and found his eyes across the garden and waved at him with her whole arm, and he waved back the same way, his whole arm, unselfconsciously, in front of the gardener and the musician and the petting zoo handler and God and everyone, and she beamed at him and went back to her dancing, and he sat in the good warm weight of being exactly where he was supposed to be. The fountain ran. The garden held them all. And 2 little girls in the dappled shade of the oldest oak tree danced like they had invented dancing, like the world was the exact right size, like there was no distance between any of them at all. Some doors don't need to be knocked on. Some doors, it turns out, were already waiting for someone small enough and brave enough to simply push them open and let the light that was always waiting on the other side come flooding in.
The end.